Hello, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to Bass 6 Basics. My name's Elliot, and I put this channel together with the most awkward title to say. I wish I'd chosen something a little less of a tongue twister, but there we are. That's the one that I chose because I thought it was funny. The purpose of this channel is to talk about the Bass 6 in all of its glory and various applications, what I use it for, and what you can use it for. Initially, though, I'm going to spend a bit of time talking about the instrument from the very basics as though you'd never seen one of these things before. Here it is in all of its six-string glory, and when I first got this instrument, which is about 8 years ago, I hadn't seen one in the flesh. I'd seen one in books, and it was purely out of curiosity that I thought, oh, I wouldn't mind having a go on that just to see what it's like. And within 20 minutes, I was buying it because I didn't have a bass that sounded anything like this. It is a unique animal. That's why I've titled this Fish or Fowl, because is it a guitar? Is it a bass? Is it a hybrid of both? Is it its own thing? These are questions that I don't pretend to know the answers to, but they're questions worth asking when we talk about this instrument and how we use it. Tiny bit of history to begin with. The bass 6 as we think of it now as an electric instrument was initially popularised by Dan Electro in the mid-50s. There is, of course, the Bajo Sexto, which is, even if I'm saying that right, of Mexican music, which has its own history and its own tradition, and there's also the contra guitar of the Spanish tradition as well. I won't get to that just yet because I haven't really done enough research. All I can talk about is the instrument that I'm holding in my hand. And it started as a going concern in the mid-50s. If you've ever heard of the term tic-tac bass utilised one of these instruments, and it was always doubling a double bass. So you'd have the double bass moving the air and giving the warmth, and the tic-tac would add the percussive attack. And basically it'd be a guitarist playing a bass 6, doubling what the double bass player would do. The double bass players at the time were very, very reluctant to go anywhere near the Fender Precision basses that were coming out. It was still something that they just didn't want to get involved with. Very few bass players did. Lionel Hampton's bass player did, Montgomery did. These were early advocates, but they were very few and far between. It wasn't until rock and roll came out that people really saw the potential of the Fender Precision bass as well. So consequently, you would still have double bass players playing in early rock and roll and certainly through country music. And to give a bit more oomph to the recordings and also the live performances, the Dan Electro bass 6 or tic-tac bass was used by a guitarist. Glenn Campbell's a classic example of that sort of thing. He would often be found playing a bass 6 on gigs. The Fender version, which we all know and love, came out in 1961 but wasn't very popular. At the time, the music didn't really suit the utility of the instrument. I mean, now there's musicians who are using this quite a lot, partly because of its nostalgic qualities, I suppose you could say. Certainly the Beatles documentary that's recently come out has given it a new lift in popularity, and but I've always found that this instrument had great potential because you could play bass and chords on it, and that's the way that I use it myself. It's predominantly as a chord instrument. I don't do many solos on it. There's still potential to do solos on it, it's just that's not the music that I play. So why? Why was this built? Yeah. As I said, it fulfilled a need in the studio, and it also helped guitarists that were used to playing the guitar, if they found themselves in a position of playing the bass, like John and George did in the Beatles, this was an instrument which was familiar enough, but gave them a bass sound, and also probably didn't have the stigma of being a bass, because there is that stigma for bass players. The quiet guy who stands in the background because he wasn't quite good enough to be a guitarist. That stigma is starting to fall away now, thank goodness, but it still exists to a certain degree. And this sort of instrument, being a kind of a crossover, helped that essentially. It meant that you could get the low notes that you wanted, you could get that certain sort of twang sound, that sort of Dwayne Eddy sort of sound that you might like, but you weren't really a bass player. Until you're a bass player that picks one up and decides, I'm going to have a go at this. If you play one of these regularly, undoubtedly you will have been asked at least once, is that a guitar or is it a bass? And I don't even pretend to know what the answer is. Is it a fish? Is it a fowl? I think it's an axolotl. It is its own thing, but it is a hybrid of the two. And with that comes a few pitfalls for both guitarists and bass players. Pitfalls for the guitarists, it's bigger. It's a 30-inch scale as opposed to a guitar scale, which is usually 25 inches or so. The strings have a higher tension to them than guitar strings do. They're also thicker. So it requires more physical effort to actually physically play the instrument as a guitar. If you play it as a bass, it's a lot more familiar. And that's initially what it was designed for. So the other thing that's a bit of a pitfall for guitar players is that chords require a bit of thought. If you're used to playing first position stuff, you can get away with a D chord, that's fine. An A chord, you're kind of pushing your luck. Anything a G chord lower sounds like mud. Like an E is just pretty much out of the question. It just doesn't, yes, you can do it. The question is why, because it doesn't sound very good. So it's a bit muddy. So you need to rethink about where are these chords going to go. Is the D chord going to be there, for instance? Is an E chord going to be there, perhaps? It requires a bit of thought, and, which is kind of good because it teaches you different voicings of similar. Pitfalls for bass players. Everything I said about guitarists could essentially be reversed. It's smaller, which doesn't necessarily sound like much of a problem until you try to get used to initially playing a 30-inch scale instrument. If you're used to playing a 34-inch scale, everything is going to feel a bit more claustrophobic initially. Like your fingers are going to be closer together. You're not really going to have the area that you might have been used to play fingerstyle or play pick style. Your body is going to sort of compress a bit. The big one that you're going to find as a bass player is the string spacing. This is designed for guitar players. This is not a bassist's string spacing at all. It's very, very close, and this is the thing that takes the most adjustment to get used to. It takes all of 20 minutes to get used to it, but it is that 20-minute hurdle that initially is like all the things that you wanted to do. Oh, I can't play slap anymore the way that I used to. You can play slap. We'll talk about that in other episodes. The other compromise that bass players will find, and I'm hesitant to raise this, but it is an issue, tone. It's got to get very mid-rangey. You're going to lose a lot of low-end beef, and that's simply due to the physics of the instrument. It's shorter scale, thinner strings, slightly lower tension. It's not going to be as oomphy and as gutty as your favourite 1964 P bass. It simply isn't. It's just not built to do that. It doesn't have the same pickups. Doesn't have the same physical structure. You don't physically have the room to move the string that much. There isn't the space. All of these things go into the physics of why you get that sound that you're used to. With that comes a great opportunity. It sounds like nothing else. It is its own thing, and that's an advantage. You can make it sound like a jazz bass. You can make it sound like a P bass if you wish. With a bit of EQing and a bit of fiddling about and pickup selection, you can get approximations. But it is its own thing, and that's the beauty of this particular instrument. That's why I like it so much. So why use it? Because it's totally diverse. Harmonically, it's diverse. You can really start to stretch out and experiment a bit more. It's a great crossover for the people who are guitar players, who want to get lower and start doing sort of low things. It gives them chances to experiment. It's a great opportunity to experiment with this instrument. Well, I like to leave it there for the moment because I think that's probably enough of me yapping away. I don't pretend to be an authority about this instrument. It's the instrument that I play the most at the present time. And it's the one that I gig with the most, and it's the one that I have most exposure to at present. But I'm not an expert. If you have knowledge, put it down in the comments. If you have corrections, put them down in the comments. If you have comments, put them down in the comments. I'd like to see this particular channel become a kind of a resource for people who play this instrument and people who are just curious about it. So let people know that this exists. If you have any comments, queries, questions, or ideas, type away down below and I'll be more than happy to read and see what I can do with them. So until next time, keep practicing and we'll see you soon.